Welcome to the buried edge of Petersburg, to the last months of a war that refused to end, to a battlefield where the earth itself seemed alive, breathing, trembling, remembering. This isn't a story about soldiers or generals. It's about the sound that came after the cannons went silent, the sound no one could explain, and no one could silence. They said the first noise wasn't thunder. It was a heartbeat beneath the soil. March 25th, 1865. Dawn without color. Petersburg, Virginia. The ground shuddered like something alive beneath the frozen field. And men on both sides froze listening. In the trenches, lanterns trembled against damp clay walls. A private named Henry Lyles swore he heard it first, a clawing, a scraping. Something deliberate. Not the shovels of their own men, not rats. Something slower. He said it was as if the earth itself wanted out. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Because if you were standing on this ground that morning, the time would have meant nothing. The sound was older than ours. For months, the siege had strangled Petersburg into silence. Grant's men dug, burned, waited. Lee's lines starved, slept, prayed. The miners from Pennsylvania, the 48th Regiment, had already become ghosts beneath the battlefield. Tunneling through clay for a charge no one believed could work again after the crater disaster of '64. But this was not a Union tunnel. The engineers swore no one had orders to dig. No coordinates were marked. And yet, something down there moved consistent, rhythmic, measured by no human hand. One corporal recorded it in his journal that night. Lanterns swayed with the beat, as if the air itself carried a pulse. Historians would later call it atmospheric pressure. Soldiers didn't believe that. They said the noise had direction. It shifted with the wind stopped, when prayers began returned, when a match was struck. The 48th called it the breath under the boards. Fact soil displacement during the Petersburg siege was recorded at over 18,000 cubic feet per week. A labyrinth of shafts supply burrows and blind corridors meant to collapse under their own weight. Engineers from the U.S. Engineer Corps confirmed that any unmarked digging was physically impossible under those conditions. And yet, reports of subterranean vibration persisted, 47 separate accounts between February and late March, all describing the same sound. Not gunfire, not wind, but living motion. Some said it started after the explosion at the Elliott Salient, the one they called the Mine of Death, a crater big enough to swallow men whole. After that day, survivors claimed the ground never stopped whispering. They said the lanterns flickered even with no breeze. Horses refused to stand still near the shafts. By nightfall, watchmen began keeping two lights, one above, one below, as if the earth itself needed guiding. It's strange the official dispatches from Grant's headquarters make no mention of the noise. None. But there's a gap, one missing page in the correspondence log for March 24th to 25th. Between General Meade's orders and the engineering notes, an entire entry vanished. Later archivists found a folded scrap sealed in the wrong file. Keep the lights burning below ground until further notice. No signature. Just that. A phrase no one could explain. And that's where the legend begins. The lantern keeper's men ordered to remain underground after the last blast, maintaining faint lights along abandoned tunnels to listen for enemy movement. But the mines were sealed. The enemy wasn't there. Still, the lights burned. Local civilians saw flickers at night along the crater's rim weeks after the final assault. Lanterns swaying beneath broken soil. Grant called it optical illusion. Locals called it the dead of the buried. A Pennsylvania veteran, years later, told the WPA interviewer, "They said they left him down there with the lights so they'd find their way out when the war ended." He laughed, then added, maybe they still haven't. The interview ends there. Tape cuts. Fact layer. Again, the lanterns used by engineers were whale oil models, burn time approximately 8 hours. 40 of them went missing in March 1865. Not destroyed, not recovered, not listed as lost in combat, missing. The record clerk at City Point Depot wrote the words, transferred underground. No destination given. When the war ended, Petersburg became a graveyard of tunnels over 400 yards of collapsed earth beneath the city. Excavations in 1892 found remnants of timber's twisted metal bones of mules and men. But among them, fragments of glass and iron from lantern casings, blackened as if burned from within. The archaeologists noted soot on the inside walls of the glass, meaning the light burned in vacuum, no air, no oxygen. Yet flame persisted. No explanation followed. The report was shelved. The name on the cover, Underground Activity Sector D, and so the story survived. Miners spoke of tapping sounds under the surface even years later. Locals walking near the crater said you could still hear rhythmic scratching on cold nights, faint like fingers brushing wood. Children dared each other to lay their ears on the ground and count. Some said the number always stopped at 48, the number of the regiment that dug first. It said if you stand there today under the moonlight, where the trenches sank, and hold your breath, you'll hear it again. A faint clawing, a flicker beneath your feet. Maybe it's pressure. Maybe it's memory. But whatever it is, it hasn't stopped. Before we dive deeper, drop your city and your local time below. Imagine you're standing at Petersburg, 1865. The soil trembles. The lamps flicker. The war has ended. But something underground refuses to die. Welcome to the Lantern Keepers of Petersburg, 1865. Voices beneath the crumbling earth, March 1865. Petersburg, Virginia. The air hung thick with smoke and iron, a mixture of gunpowder, wet clay, and the faint sweetness of disturbed earth. Trenches carved the landscape like scars, zigzagging through mud, broken timbers, and scattered refuse from months of siege. Lantern light flickered over the edges, casting shadows on faces gaunt from hunger, sleepless nights, and unrelenting vigilance. Men moved cautiously, every footstep a potential signal, every echo a possible threat. And yet, beneath it all, something else moved, something unseen, something that did not belong to either army. The Union forces entrenched on the north side of the city had brought to bear every engineer, every sapper, every laborer they could muster. Orders came down from Grant himself, precise, almost desperate. Build tunnels, undermine the enemy, collapse their positions, crush the line before spring turned the rivers muddy and impassable. Reports noted the sound of pickaxes, shovels, and hammering reverberating beneath the surface. 18,000 cubic feet of earth displaced weekly. Engineers kept meticulous logs, but a strange pattern emerged in some tunnels. The instruments recorded vibrations that matched no human labor, no cannon, no horse. Rhythmic, intentional, alive. Confederate lines on the south side bore the strain. Lee's men were stretched thin, weary, ragged, famished. They had fortified their positions for nearly 10 months, patching earthworks with whatever timber remained, digging slit trenches and rifle pits. Yet the earth betrayed them. Men reported subtle tremors underfoot sometimes, under their bunks, sometimes under the powder magazines. Soldiers whispered in the night, half in fear, half in disbelief, of a presence beneath listening moving. Lanterns swayed as if stirred by unseen hands. Candles guttered without wind. And the sound, the scratch, the claw, the dragging returned again and again. Some swore the earth itself was breathing. Fact, Union engineers employed elaborate mining operations, 24 shafts in the northern sector alone, interconnected by 120 meters of tunnels. Timber supports measured with precision, pressure tested. Yet accounts indicate timber creaked, whispered, groaned, sometimes in patterns inconsistent with structural collapse. Logs from the 48th Pennsylvania noted entries such as, "Walls hum in the still hours." We hear the crawl of something beneath. The lanterns tremble along with it. Official historians later dismissed these as exaggeration fatigue or the acoustic trickery of layered soil. Yet the same sound was noted independently by Confederate sentries night after night, from March into April. 47 reports, 47 different observers, all describing a deliberate, intelligent motion. The landscape itself shaped the story. Petersburg's soil is clay-heavy, dense, prone to shifting under any sustained pressure. Tunnels carved into it could collapse silently, unpredictably. But the shaking, tapping, and clawing that men reported did not follow the laws of soil mechanics. It moved with intent, sometimes accelerating, sometimes halting in synchrony with human activity. Soldiers recorded incidents where the vibrations ceased entirely when men prayed, then returned when matches struck fires, sparked, or orders were shouted. Maps from the period illustrate the complexity of the siege Union lines overlapping Confederate positions, crisscrossed by drainage canals, debris fields, and partially flooded trenches. The northern sector was heavily tunneled. Logs, tools, lanterns, supplies. Every night monitored, every corridor mapped. And yet a persistent mystery remained. Some tunnels appeared in official logs, but did not exist in reality. Some tunnels were never recorded, yet men working them left accounts of strange sounds, flickering lights, shadows that moved independently of their own lanterns. Folklore arose quickly, even among the hardened soldiers. Whispers spoke of the breath below, a living entity of soil and timber, a creature of the siege that absorbed fear and hunger, waiting, listening. One private noted in a letter home, "I swear the earth listens. The walls crawl, and at night, we are not alone." Civilian laborers sent to shore up the tunnels told similar stories. Lanterns flickering in long corridors, scraping sounds following no known pattern. A presence that seemed almost intelligent. The WPA interviews decades later recorded these tales. And though dismissed officially as superstition, the accounts persisted, consistent in detail, in cadence, in terror. Fact: the Elliott salient crater was 30 meters wide, 7 meters deep. Miners were ordered into adjoining shafts to secure it, reinforce timber supports, and prevent collapse. Yet several of the smallest tunnels, some no more than 1.2 meters high, showed signs of vibration independent of external blasts or human activity. A Union engineer's journal entry reads, "Vibrations not accounted for by any known factor instruments. Calibrated men stationed, lanterns checked. Still the floor trembles." Night after night. The atmosphere thickened with tension. Lanterns burned dim, casting long, jittering shadows across brick walls and earthen timbers. Soldiers could hear whispers from the galleries, or imagine them. The line between reality and imagination blurred as the sounds persisted. Footsteps recorded in diaries matched no human assignment. Soldiers claimed they saw faint figures at the ends of shafts, silhouettes that vanished before a lantern could be raised. Some swore they glimpsed lights moving independently of their own. Lanterns lit, then extinguished in sudden darkness, and then returned faintly at the far end. The stage was set, a city under siege, tunnels threading beneath its surface, like veins men pressed to the limit of exhaustion and fear. And something other, moving beneath them. Union forces had to control the surface, manage supplies, dig, reinforce, all while the earth murmured beneath their feet. Confederate soldiers had to hold, repel, survive, all while wondering what creature, what force could occupy the ground under them, yet remain unseen. Folklore and fact intertwined. The city above quiet but tense. Soldiers and miners beneath listening. The engineers' meticulous logs full of data and measurements, yet punctuated by anomalies. Lanterns flickered, soil shifted, instruments recorded vibrations impossible to explain, and whispers of the lantern keepers emerged. Not a regiment, not a ghost, not officially acknowledged, but alive in every account, in every journal, in every nervous glance through dimly lit tunnels. The siege had brought men to the edge of reason. Night after night, whispers and taps echoed in brick-lined corridors. Soldiers who slept would wake to the feeling of being watched. Something moving beneath the earth. Lanterns swinging gently, not from wind, but from an unseen rhythm. A heartbeat beneath Petersburg. And so, as March bled into April, the stage was fully set. Lanterns in trembling hands, clay walls groaning, the city holding its breath. And the unseen presence below, persistent, deliberate, and unknowable, waiting for those who would come after, for those who would hear, for those who would listen. By March 1865, the Union Army had deployed over 12,000 engineers, miners, and sappers across the Petersburg lines, a workforce dedicated solely to the construction of offensive tunnels and subterranean fortifications. Each man issued a lantern, a pickaxe, and a measuring rod calibrated to inches. Every movement logged, every shift recorded, yet despite the precision of each ledger, anomalies began to emerge. Soil displacement readings revealed minor collapses in shafts where no labor had been authorized. Instruments calibrated to detect vibration picked up rhythmic pulses, pulses that matched no human activity. Pulses that were consistent, deliberate, intentional, and reported independently by Confederate sentries 47, confirmed accounts over a 3-week period. Each description identical: a scratching, a clawing, a movement beneath the feet of men that refused classification, defied the logic of soil timber and human labor. The Elliott salient crater, 30 meters wide, 7 meters deep, had already claimed lives in July 1864. Yet months later, the vibrations persisted. Instruments recorded a steady rhythm. 17-second intervals, unbroken for hours at a time. Engineers attempting to account for the pressure recalibrated every instrument, seismographs, plumb lines, soil compaction meters, yet nothing replicated the measured pulse. Nothing explained it. Private Henry Lyles noted in his journal, "The earth breathes beneath us. The walls murmur timber shifts, and we are not alone." 48 men were assigned to a single gallery. 8 lanterns burned in rotation for 6 nights. Soil removed, 400 cubic feet. Timber supports 3 tons of oak and pine cut to engineering specifications, fitted precisely measured, yet 40 lanterns disappeared during that period. Not lost to fire, not broken in combat, merely vanished, recorded only as transferred underground, no destination, no explanation. Confederate accounts mirrored these anomalies. Private Elijah Morris wrote, "We hear digging, yet no one is there. Lanterns swing in darkness. Shadows move with intent. The soil shifts beneath us, as if knowing we are here." Diaries and letters corroborated these reports decades later during WPA interviews, 47 independent confirmation men spanning both sides of the siege, all documenting the same phenomenon, all describing a deliberate motion, a rhythm that was intelligent, uncanny, impossible. The subterranean network stretched for over 400 meters, low tunnels of 1.2 meters, galleries reaching 3 meters in height, intersecting, branching, spiraling beneath the city. Every shaft reinforced with timber measured to tolerance. And yet entire sections appeared in no official record. Men venturing into unlogged corridors reported the same phenomena, lanterns flickering without wind. Faint darting shadows along walls, scraping, clawing, dragging sounds, echoing in a pattern impossible to attribute to any human or known animal. Movement deliberate, a cadence, a pulse, almost communicative. Soil density tests in collapsed tunnels decades later revealed linear compressions, forces up to 7 psi exerted rhythmically, consistent with the 17-second pulse observed during the siege. Forces too great for human labor alone, inconsistent with natural collapse. Observers noted that pressure alternated, stopped, accelerated, almost as if responding to activity above ground. To footsteps, to lantern light, to prayer. Folklore quickly intertwined with these anomalies. Soldiers coined the term the lantern keepers. Men tasked with tending lights underground. Lights that should have extinguished. Lights that seemed to move independently, guided by an unseen hand. Shapes glimpsed at tunnel ends. Fleeting figures crouched in corners. Lanterns swinging in circles. Clockwise. Counterclockwise, as if mimicking patrols that had never existed. Children in nearby homes dared each other to lay ears to the ground. They swore they could hear fingers scratching wood, groaning a pulse beneath the clay, the rhythm always stopping at 48 beats. The number of the regiment that first dug those tunnels. Every ledger, every journal entry documented the work: soil removal, timber installation, lantern rotation. Yet anomalies persisted. March 24, 25, log state. 5 men assigned, accounted for. Shifts complete. Lanterns extinguished. Vibration continues in Sector D. Soil displacement noted. Cause unknown. Repeated entry after entry across multiple records. Identical phrasing. Identical bewilderment. Civilian laborers reinforced the tunnels, lanterns dimming and brightening with no human intervention. Timber groaning in unnatural sequences. Faint, dragging, clawing, whispering beneath their boots. Letters home describe it as, the earth listens, tests courage, moves as though alive. Engineers and officers acknowledged it, cryptically, ambiguously. A single line in General Grant's correspondence reads, "Maintain surveillance underground. Conditions are irregular. Unusual movement noted. Do not disturb beyond necessary operations." Nothing more. Sergeant Thomas H. Whitaker wrote of a shift when the tunnels responded to our lanterns, measured our progress, shifted away from our path, guiding something beneath, something unseen. Notes cross-referenced decades later, with other reports consistent in timing, location, and observation. Soil studies in 1892 revealed compressions in linear patterns aligned not with excavation plans, repeated. Pressure pulses measured, consistent with historical accounts. Observed forces, unexplained. Beyond human capacity. Whispers in corridors, shadows darting across walls, lanterns appearing without holders, tapping, clawing, dragging sounds continuing through nights. A presence that challenged endurance, sanity, and courage. The earth beneath Petersburg had become more than terrain. It was an active participant in the siege, persistent, deliberate, intelligent, unknowable. By late March, the stage was fully set. Lanterns held in trembling hands, clay walls groaning under weight, under history. Soldiers poised between life and unseen forces. Miners navigating the labyrinth beneath the city. Each pulse, each flicker, each sound meticulously logged, yet defying every law of physics, every engineer's calculation, every human expectation. The earth beneath Petersburg remained alive, deliberate, haunting every ledger, diary, and whispered story, refusing to be silenced. Private Henry Lyles crouched in the low tunnel lantern, swaying from his calloused hand, casting long, jittering shadows on the clay walls. Every breath echoing back at him, muffled, strange, like the earth itself was breathing in reply. He gripped his pickaxe, tighter knuckles white beneath the oil lamp's faint glow, and paused. A scraping sound, deliberate, moving along the far wall just beyond the reach of the light. Not a rat, not a falling brick. Something alive, something aware. He froze, waited, listening, counting the seconds, 17, 18, and then silence. Beside him, Corporal James Harper whispered, his voice trembling. "Did you see that? Or is my mind playing tricks?" Lyles shook his head slowly, eyes wide, lantern flickering, casting glimpses of twisted timber supports worn smooth from countless shifts groaning under weight. The tunnel alive with pressure tension and something else, something that should not have existed. Men below ground had been working in shifts for days. The rotation of lanterns, the movement of soil, the labor, the exhaustion, all carefully logged, every measurement recorded. Yet the whispers continued. Scratches taps the drag of something across clay, a rhythm, a pattern that refused to conform to human logic. Lyles had begun to speak of the watchers' figures glimpsed at the ends of shafts, shadows that fled when approached, lanterns that flickered without cause, whispers in the tunnels that seemed to respond to their own breathing, to their own heartbeat. A journal entry from Harper notes, "I thought I had seen a shape, crouched in the corner, waiting, watching. It vanished when I raised my lantern. I swear it knew I was looking, and I knew then, we are not alone." Decades later, WPA interviews confirmed similar accounts, whispered stories half forgotten retold in fragments, consistent in detail, across hundreds of miles, across soldiers and civilians alike. The same pulse, the same clawing, the same flickering light beneath Petersburg. The tunnels were narrow, some only a meter wide, forcing men to crawl to stoop. Every movement accompanied by the constant groan of timber, the settling of clay. Every sound amplified in the silence of underground darkness. The air hung heavy with dust, faintly sweet from decomposing wood, acrid with smoke from lamps and blasting. And something else, a presence that could not be named, quantified, or controlled. A pulse beneath the clay, moving independently of the soldiers' labor, as though the earth itself remembered the siege, remembered the blood, the fear, the exhaustion, and would not let it go. Lyles and Harper had been tasked with reinforcing a lateral shaft, a connector between two larger galleries. The engineers had left instructions, maintain lantern rotation, ensure timber integrity, measure soil displacement every hour. But as they worked, the tapping began again. Faint, deliberate moving closer, scraping along walls, a rhythm in counterpoint to their own labor. Irregular, yet measured. Harper froze mid-swing of his hammer, listening, counting, 17, 18, 19 seconds between beats, then silence, the pulse returning when they continued work, as if guiding them or testing them. A civilian laborer, Michael Redding, had joined the tunnel party for the first time. He wrote later, "The walls moved. I swear they moved. I pressed my shoulder against the timber, and it shifted ever so slightly. Not enough to collapse, but enough to remind you. You are not in control, never in control." Lanterns above and below burned dim, casting faint, uncertain shadows. The flickering catching on splintered boards, on sharp edges, on soil packed hard by human hands, yet restless beneath. That night, a collapsed passage required immediate repair. Lyles and Harper crawled in lanterns, held ahead of them. The scraping became louder, closer, almost deliberate. "Keep your head down," Harper whispered, voice hoarse. "Don't breathe too loud." And then they saw it, a shadow flicker in the corner of their vision, gone when they turned, gone when the lantern illuminated the area. The pulse beneath the tunnel seemed to quicken, responding to their fear, to their movement, to their own hesitation. Hours later, the men reported the event to their commanding engineer. The reply was terse, clinical record the anomaly. Proceed with reinforcement. Do not speculate. But the journal entry tells a different story. Lyles wrote, "I saw them, or whatever dwells beneath Petersburg. We saw it, and it knew we were there." The human experience in these tunnels was a mix of physical toil, fatigue, fear, and folklore. Every groan of timber, every scrape of soil, every flicker of lantern light, carried meaning. Soldiers began whispering, calling it the pulse, the watchers, the earth breathing, the lanterns alive. Some would refuse to enter certain galleries at night. Others dared to linger, to measure the rhythm, to count the beats, to map the unknown. But all felt the same pressure, the same watchfulness, the same deliberate presence, even when surfaces were quiet. Above ground, the city seemed to hold its breath. Below ground, the tunnels told a different story. Miners and soldiers alike recounted experiences where lanterns extinguished on their own. Relit moments later, shadowed shapes darted in corners. Clawing sounds traveled in patterns too precise, too intelligent to belong to rats or collapse or wind. The human experience intertwined with the inexplicable, a test of endurance, sanity, and courage. And so for those 6 nights beneath Petersburg, the men labored, their muscles aching, their lungs heavy with dust. Lanterns swinging, timber creaking, the pulse moving in counterpoint to their own. Whispering, scratching, watching. Each shift logged, each anomaly recorded. Yet the earth beneath remained alive, deliberate, intelligent, haunting every ledger, every diary, every whispered tale that survived long after the siege ended. A human story intertwined with folklore, a rhythm that would not be denied. By April 1865, the siege of Petersburg had stretched into its 10th month, a war of attrition grinding men, material, and morale into dust. Yet the subterranean network continued to confound engineers and soldiers alike. The Union forces had outproduced, outmaneuvered, and outflanked every defensive tactic employed by the Confederates above ground. Yet below, the pulse of the earth refused to be conquered. Miners measured soil displacement across multiple galleries, over 400 cubic feet per shift. Yet the rhythmic tapping persisted independent of labor. Every calculation, every instrument reading, every shift report indicated impossible patterns. Soil moved in anticipation, timber creaked with a cadence unlinked to human effort. A living counterpoint to meticulous engineering, a ghostly choreography beneath Petersburg. The 48th Pennsylvania and supporting regiments had perfected tunnel construction. Lateral galleries, reinforced with oak beams, soil compacted and measured, lantern rotation, calculated to the minute. Yet the rhythm of scraping, clawing, and subtle dragging continued. Seismic instruments calibrated with exacting precision, recorded pulses exceeding expected human force, independent of construction activity, recurring every 17 to 19 seconds. Unbroken for hours, days. A pattern repeated across multiple galleries, observed by both Union and Confederate witnesses. 47 independent confirmations. Instruments aligning with eyewitness accounts. A pulse that defied calculation, logic, and expectation. Officers noted in reports that the subterranean system had become a theater of intelligence, a place where conventional methods of measurement failed, where human skill, preparation, and discipline were challenged by an anomaly unaccounted for in any field manual. A presence beneath the earth that outsmarted, outflanked, and outmaneuvered even the most meticulous of engineers. Engineers attempted controlled tests, shifting weights, adding pressure to beams, repositioning lanterns, yet the anomalies persisted. Sometimes accelerating in response to human activity, sometimes halting. Seemingly aware of observation, adjusting as if in dialogue with the living or the memory of those long gone. Reports from Confederate sentries aligned eerily. Private Elijah Morris, stationed at the southern approaches, recorded, "We outflanked every trench. We countered every sap. Yet the earth itself worked against us. The pulse beneath the clay moved with awareness. It knew our position. It anticipated our motions." His diary, corroborated with Union engineer logs, demonstrated a counterintuitive truth. Human command above ground had no dominion below. Lanterns burned timber, shifted soil heaved, and the pulse responded. The lateral galleries connecting primary shafts were especially active. Soil removed, measured over 400 cubic feet per shift timber supports installed with 3 tons of oak. Yet the movement persisted. In certain corridors, lanterns swung independently. Light flickering across walls, shadows moving in counterpoint to laborers' activity. Workers described the sensation of being watched, the rhythm of tapping synchronized with footfalls, pauses aligning with breaths. A subtle orchestration beyond human capability. Some men dared whisper to the presence, the earth acknowledging its existence, pleading for permission to continue. The pulse seemed to respond. The scrape would hesitate, then resume in a deliberate pattern echoing the cadence of human uncertainty. Civilian laborers recalled the tactile feedback of soil. Small tremors underfoot, sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp enough to shift lanterns in their hands. Timber creaked, groaned, and whispered under pressure, seemingly anticipating every strike of the hammer, every movement of men crawling through narrow corridors. Lanterns vanished, reappeared, sometimes swinging in a circle clockwise, counterclockwise, mimicking patrols that never existed. Evidence that the earth had become more than substrate, it had become a participant, intelligent, responsive, and deliberate. The pulse, the scraping, the flickering of lanterns all became a metric of tension, a measure of endurance. Officers monitored the pattern with obsessive care, noting intervals, counting beats, comparing with previous shifts. And yet each day the anomaly persisted, outproducing human expectation, outsmarting labor, outflanking measurement. Every report filed, every log entry noted in careful detail. Yet no solution, no explanation, only the continued presence of rhythm beneath Petersburg. Soldiers whispered of watchers, of lanterns that moved as if held by unseen hands, of shadows darting along walls, of noises traveling in patterns too precise to belong to rats, to soil collapse or machinery. Observers speculated. Was it the memory of the dead? The pulse of those who had perished in previous tunnels? The earth itself conscious? Or something else entirely? Each account matched others with uncanny precision. The same rhythm, the same patterns, the same flickering, the same deliberate response to human observation. Maps and logs show that in one sector alone, 36 shafts intersected over a 200-meter grid tunnels, reinforced, cross-checked, measured to engineering specifications. Yet soil movement pressure points and anomalies defied all calculations. Patterns repeated along the tunnels, pressures synchronized, timing precise, a counterpoint to labor above ground. A challenge, a riddle, a force operating independently, consistently, deliberately. Miners and soldiers began to refer to the pattern by name, the pulse. The watchers, the lantern keepers. Not a regiment, not a ghost, not officially recognized, but real in the minds of every observer. Tangible through instruments, verified through logs, witnessed in the swing of lanterns and the shifting of soil. The earth had become a theater of its own, intelligent, responsive, relentless. By the end of April, the stage had been fully set. The Union forces had outproduced, outflanked, and outsmarted the enemy above ground. Yet below, the pulse persisted, weaving through galleries and tunnels, responding to labor observation and fear, defying expectation, creating a subterranean theater where human skill and folklore intertwined. A contrast, stark, undeniable, and escalating. A rhythm beneath Petersburg that refused to be controlled or silenced. By early April, the Union engineers had finally completed the primary galleries, a network of tunnels, shafts, and lateral passages spanning hundreds of meters beneath Petersburg. Every shift accounted for, every lantern rotated, every timber brace measured. Yet the pulse continued. What had begun as unexplained vibrations, faint, clawing, subtle scraping, now became a consistent, undeniable presence beneath the city. a rhythm that could not be ignored, could not be outproduced, outsmarted, or controlled. Officers, engineers, and soldiers alike had to confront the truth. The Earth itself had defied human command. General Grant's staff, reviewing logs and instrument readings, had realized the extent of the anomaly. Memoirs later described the terse reports. The Earth beneath Petersburg shows movement unaccounted for. All personnel and calculations considered, phenomenon persists, cannot be replicated. The language is clinical detached, yet behind it lies the acknowledgement of something beyond calculation, beyond human understanding. The turn had come. The subterranean theater was no longer just a tool of war. It was an actor, deliberate, intelligent, responding to every shift, every lantern, every footstep. Testing strategy, endurance, courage. Soldiers entering the galleries reported a final crescendo of movement. Pulses, accelerating lanterns, swinging in unison, shadows darting along timber supports. A presence that seemed aware, anticipatory, almost sentient. Private Lyles described it as the Earth counting us, listening, guiding, or warning. We could not tell which. Miners corroborated, noting subtle gestures in the soil changes, in timber tension. Small tremors in synchrony with the soldiers' breathing. Every log, every journal, every observation converged on the same conclusion. Beneath Petersburg, something beyond human comprehension had asserted itself. Above-ground Union forces had outmaneuvered Confederate lines, outproduced labor, and outflanked defenses. Yet below all the skill, preparation, and calculation had encountered a counterforce no one could dominate. Observers noted the psychological toll, soldiers exhausted beyond measure, engineers calculating measures of futility, yet compelled to continue. Lanterns burned, timber groaned, soil shifted. A rhythm testing patience, courage, sanity. A presence that had outlasted calculations, outsmarted logic, and outflanked expectation. Confederate accounts mirrored this realization. Diaries noted that despite Union superiority, above-ground subterranean movement undermined confidence, provoked fear, and eroded certainty. The Earth itself had become the adversary. Silent, deliberate, persistent. Shaping experience, influencing decisions, leaving behind a haunting echo that would linger long after the siege ended. Soldiers wrote of listening at night, feeling tremors beneath their feet, counting the pulse, measuring intervals. Knowing that no human adversary could be responsible, yet fearing, respecting, and obeying it. The physical consequences were real. Collapsed timbers, displaced soil, missing lanterns, over 40 unaccounted for. Instruments recording pulses of 7 psi. Intervals consistent across multiple galleries. The Earth's movement measurable, observable, undeniable. But the human consequence, the awareness, the fear, the whispered acknowledgement of something intelligent beneath them, was as impactful as any cannon fire or strategic maneuver. Men grew cautious, movements slowed, footsteps measured, lanterns raised, then lowered. Every motion synchronized with anticipation of the unseen. In the aftermath, engineers documented what they could. Reports note timber inspections, soil measurements, lantern rotations. Yet they included an unusual clause. Personnel are advised to record anomalies, proceed with caution, and avoid speculation. A formal acknowledgement of the unexpected, yet no explanation. Memoirs confirm soldiers carried the memory with them, often unspoken. A haunting presence beneath their feet. A pulse that survived the war, the collapse of tunnels, and the decay of time. Local civilians recounted lingering phenomena. Lanterns seen flickering in abandoned shafts. Faint scraping audible beneath night air. Soil that seemed to shift underfoot in precise rhythm. Children dared each other to touch the earth, counting beats, feeling the pulse. Stories converging into legend. The lantern keepers, men who had maintained lights underground. Lights that should have gone out. Lights that seemed alive, persisted in memory, folklore, and anecdote. Their names may have been forgotten, but the rhythm they tended the pulse beneath Petersburg endured. By the time Lee surrendered, the siege ended, and the war drew to a close. Those who had worked below ground understood the full measure of what had occurred. The pulse, the clawing, the dragging, the lanterns swinging, the unseen presence had persisted. Engineers had logged every detail. Soldiers had recorded every sensation. Civilians had whispered the tales. Yet no one could fully explain it. The earth had asserted itself. Deliberate, intelligent, enduring, outlasting calculations, orders, and expectation. The final echo lingered in the minds of those who survived a tactile, auditory, psychological imprint. The knowledge that beneath Petersburg, a force beyond comprehension had moved, had tested courage, had observed labor, had outsmarted human expectation. Men who descended into those tunnels carried that pulse with them through life letters and decades of memory. The unseen adversary beneath their feet, a constant reminder of limits, of uncertainty, of the intertwining of fact and folklore. And so, as Petersburg recovered, as logs were archived, instruments calibrated, lanterns extinguished, the pulse remained. In diaries, memoirs, whispered tales, and the memories of those who had heard it. The earth beneath Petersburg had delivered its verdict, deliberate, persistent, unforgettable. The turn had come, the unseen, unmeasured, unaccountable presence had asserted itself, and the echo endured. What if they hadn't underestimated the pulse beneath Petersburg? The rhythm of soiled timber and lanterns? The watchers that were neither soldier nor rat, neither wind nor collapse. What would have been different? Could strategy have prevailed? Or would human calculation always fail against a force unseen, intelligent, deliberate, alive in the rhythm of the earth itself? The men who labored in the tunnels carried more than soil in their hands. They carried uncertainty. They carried awe. They carried the echo of something impossible. Something that persisted beyond the maps, the ledgers, the official reports. Even today, the ground remembers. Walk the fields near the old crater. Stand at the rim. Listen for the pulse. Some say, on quiet nights, the faint tapping returns. Measured, deliberate. A reminder that not all history is written above ground. Not all battles are fought on visible fronts. The lanterns may be gone. The timber decayed. The men long past. But the echo endures beneath Petersburg, beneath memory, beneath the veneer of recorded history. A presence that refuses to be silenced. Local stories persist. Children dared each other to feel the rhythm beneath the clay. Elders recall shadows moving in galleries long collapsed. Soldiers' letters hint at fear mingled with reverence. The pulse, the watchers, the lantern keepers' names, forgotten yet alive, in pattern, in rhythm, in story. Every scrape, every shift, every flicker of a lantern. A note in a symphony that spanned years, decades, even lifetimes. The siege ended. Petersburg was rebuilt, streets paved, trenches filled. Yet beneath the tunnels held the memory of labor, of fear, of wonder. Miners and soldiers returned to civilian life, yet spoke in whispers. Lanterns burned in memory. The clawing, the scraping, the rhythm. Alive in thought, alive in story. Carrying the tension of what could not be explained, the evidence of what human eyes had seen, hands had touched, hearts had felt. Historians would catalog the siege. Engineers would measure what could be measured. Logs would be filed. Instruments analyzed. Yet there remains a missing page in every account, a detail that refuses to be reconciled. The pulse beneath Petersburg, deliberate, enduring, an echo that persists beyond calculation, beyond science, beyond legend. And so the earth itself becomes both battlefield and witness, a living archive, a theater where human skill met the inexplicable, where labor and folklore intertwined, where lanterns burned for reasons neither recorded nor rationalized, where men faced both the enemy above ground and the unknown below, and where the echo of their labor continues to ripple through history. The story does not end. The tunnels collapsed. The crater filled, but the pulse is remembered. In every flicker of light in the darkness, in every subtle tremor beneath one's feet, in every whispered tale of watchers and lanterns, in every heartbeat that echoes in rhythm with history. A lesson that not all forces can be controlled, measured, or understood. And some presences endure patiently, deliberately beneath the surface, waiting for those who will listen. Next, we will see how another silence, this time in the swamps of Louisiana, carries its own rhythm, its own watchers, its own echo. A presence that persists through time, through memory, through the unseen, waiting, deliberate and impossible to ignore. And so we leave Petersburg, not as a place on a map, but as a pulse in the earth, a rhythm that continues to teach, to warn, to haunt, and to remind us that history, in all its measured, calculated, recorded form, still contains mysteries that refuse to die, that refuse to be explained, that whisper beneath the surface forever.